Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. For today's topic, we're going to be talking about something that it's not really biblical, but it does have history with the church. Obviously, this is history of the church. We're talking about the crusade, the different crusades. Everybody knows about the crusades in the Holy Land against the Muslims and stuff like that. But one of the not so much talked about crusades is the one that we'll be talking about today, the Albigensian Crusade, or the Crusade against the Cathars, who were a sect of Christians that lived in the south of France, and they had they had a whole entire crusade against them, and we're gonna talk about that today. We're gonna talk about who they were, what happened, the consequences and stuff of that. Why this crusade was a little bit different than the other crusades, what happened, and what how they go what happened, how the crusade ended, and then overall how that led into the Inquisition, and then how they eventually fizzled out because of the Inquisition. So you know pretty excited for today's video. I actually know a lot about this topic. This isn't something that's like, oh, the Bible I just read. I've known about this for quite many years, and I've studied a lot. I will have sources in the description of the places I use to get my research from, but I've known about it for quite a while. So here we go. Um, the Cathars were, like we were talking about, they were a sect of Christianity from the 12th to 13th century that had a crusade against them. But there was reasons for why the crusade happened and stuff like that, political ones. But they had first they had first grown the Pope's ire by kind of being different in the church. They were a Christian sect that lived primarily during the 12th and 13th century that eventually drew the ire of the Catholic Church and the papacy. They started from an anti-materialist movement in the sects of, you know, they were like a Gnostic sect. So it's like you get into like when you get into Christianity and stuff in the Bible and stuff, people really start to believe certain things, and then they take different movements form from that. So they were a movement from the materialist movement, which anti-materialist is kind of self-explanatory. People that did not put a bunch of stuff into materialist things. These guys were different for a couple other reasons. They didn't use crosses. That was be a thing. So they thought that, so the Cathar way of thinking is that their body was a temple, so they didn't have crosses. They didn't have, um, they didn't build churches, and their masses were a lot different than what you would consider a mass. They were kind of so they were kind of a response to the corruption on in the church at this time. So as the church kind of grew and throughout the centuries, it became a very powerful institution, very powerful. And unfortunately, power corrupts absolutely. So there were some popes that were not the greatest and didn't do the greatest of things. And around this time, that's when a lot of this corruption and stuff and orgies and stuff. So these people kind of came as a movement from that they were like, they saw all of that and they were rejecting that, which went against the status quo from this time, and did not work out so well for them. So some other things about them that were kind of interesting, that I guess, is they thought that like sex was a mortal sin, because, and not only sex, but having sex with somebody, then procreating, because they kind of believed that we were all suffering and we were stuck in this, and we're suffering for like the demons pleasure and stuff like that, so that if they were having sex and having a kid, that's bringing another soul into torture. So they kind of saw that as a grave thing. Their masses were a lot different. I say to say they would have their mass, like they would be like, they'd come out and they would say like the Lord's Prayer, which is Father, have I sinned, or in my name, give us this day our daily bread, and blah blah, so on and so forth. I don't know what exactly was what, but they would do that, and then they would um, confess their sins out loud to God, like. And they weren't in a church; they were just in a meeting spot, because they didn't build churches, because they didn't believe in that. And then after that they would have a meal, and then they did like a lot of fasting and stuff like that. and a lot of prayer and a lot of fasting. So it'd be a lot different from that. Uh, they didn't have crosses and stuff. So, yeah, that's pretty much who they were. Kind of like really hard line people that wanted to follow the Bible. I mean, but see, like, it's like the stuff they believed in was a lot different. They didn't believe in the Eucharist and the sacraments. They didn't believe that those were valid, and they didn't believe in the hierarchy of the church. So they didn't. This is where they kind of really came into like um button heads with the church because they saw the higher ecclesiastical hierarchy as they didn't believe in that. So the people that were like that's what I like about the Catholic Church specifically is that going back each priest that has been consecrated or has been a they've gotten their blessing. They can trace that lineage all back to somebody who was blessed by somebody who was blessed by somebody. So it's not like I mean, unfortunately, in today's world, pretty much anybody can come out and you can be like, "Well, I'm a pastor now. I decided the word's good," or if I joined this non-denominational church for 6 months, and I really feel that I feel it. So I'm gonna become a priest, or well, I guess that's a pastor, and that's obviously not ordained by the church, the Catholic Church. So these guys didn't believe in any of that. They were like, "Nope, we're not doing that. We're good." So it didn't work out too well for them, as we will find out. All right. So let's set a prelude to this crusade, what's kind of going on right now. So we are in the southern area of France, and I'm going to put maps up and stuff as I'm talking so you can kind of see what we're talking about and what's going on with these people. And we're at like 1250 AD. Right now, there's some corruption going on in the church. We're gonna just put that out there. We're not gonna try to hide. We're gonna claim it. People are fallible. They do commit sin, and unfortunately, sometimes it can go to the top. But so at this time, we have things like that going on, corruption in the church, and I mean, it's a very different time. You're talking about 1250s, 1300s. Very different life than what we're living today. But so we got the Cathars, like we've talked about for a little bit, how they're different. They're a sect, and they're kind of button heads with Rome, and they're kind of denying them. Really, they're like, no, we don't want that. We don't want to be a part of your church. We are Christian. They're claiming to be Christian, but they don't want to get with the program, so to speak. And this isn't now as today where you can go break off your own denominations. That was a no-no. So that and there was so the prelude to this is that the Pope Innocent III, which I'll put a thing up of him, he sent a delegation, a papal legate, which is a dude below him that he like specially ordained to send to go like kind of bring these guys because they tried. It's not like they just showed up and started killing everybody. They tried. They for their credit, let's give them a little bit of credit, I guess. But they showed up to this place to Toulouse and stuff like that in southern France, and they tried to be like, "Hey guys, you got to get with the program here." So the papal legate, um, which I'll put a picture of him up, whatever his name was, Pierre something. So Pierre is the guy that's supposed to go, and they're all with a bunch of other bishops and friars and stuff, and they're trying to go like delegate and be like, "Hey, we guys capitulate, please, please," and they're like, "No." Well, so unfortunately, like the papal legate, the guy that was sent, was assassinated. Supposedly, it was done by a character that's going to become very very interesting later in the thing. So there's kind of two sides to this thing, but there's also a political aspect of it. So it's like there's the churches with the crusaders, but so one thing I guess I forgot to mention, one thing about the Cathars is they would not commit to military service or allegiances, oaths of allegiance. So they didn't have a military force. So it's like, well, then how can you have a crusade against a force that, well, that's kind of where the political aspect comes into this, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But one of the lords of this city, so these people obviously drew some sympathies because of the corruption in the church at the time. So the people that were trying to not be corruption would get sympathy from their lords and stuff from local lords. So as the papal legate's going to try to discuss with these things, We're going to talk about Raymond the Fourth, Raymond the Fourth of Toulouse, Saint of Toulouse, Saint of Gilbert, something like that. I'm going off the top of my head, but I'm going to put him up here, and I have these notes here, but it's easier to go off the top of my head. The video flows a lot better. So we have this Raymond guy, and he's going to be very important later. But he's going to be the side that kind of is, since Cathars have no military force. So it's like, well, then how can you have a crusade against the force? Well, there is. So they have. This is where the political aspect would come in. But so this Raymond guy, Count of Toulouse, big guy for that area, the Lord or whatever. One of his knights kills Pierre, whatever his name is, French guy. These are all French names too, and I care about where it happens, but like the people, I mean, come on now. All right. But anyway, Pierre dies, and that's what kicks off this whole crusade. So it was like, oh, we're trying to bring you in, and you kill my guy? Yeah. So they sent the troops in. This started in around 1209 AD. That's when this started. The Crusader forces were mainly made up of people from the north, and there's an aspect of why this crusade was so popular and stuff, and it actually makes a lot of sense. But this was a full-fledged crusade by the Pope, and the thing was, so you would get indulgences. And what is an indulgence? An indulgence is you don't have to work in the afterlife. It's the afterlife free of sin, which is a crazy thing to promise. Like if somebody came to you and was like, if you go kill all these people for me, when you die and go to heaven, you will skip the line, so to speak. Because there's like a thing when you get to heaven. I don't know if it's. I only know this because of Dante's, the guy that wrote Dante's Inferno. It's like, so this, it's like there's levels to heaven. So when you get to heaven, you have all your sins and stuff like that. You have to work through them. That's how it's supposed to go. Is like you work off those sins that you did. So the guy's coming along and being like, well, you don't have to do that. You can go kill all of these people. And there's an aspect of why this was so popular too. So I think we're gonna get into that in a little bit too. But so right now we're at 1209. Pierre, the Pope's papal legate, has died. He was assassinated, and we're sending in he wrote the proclamation, and here we go. So when it comes to talking about this crusade and stuff like that, it was kind of very one-sided to a point. So when it began, there was no force that the Cathars had. They had no army, obviously. And though the local lord may have been pissed off or whatever, he's not about to raise all his men to come fight a crusade. So once the order was given out, it was pretty popular, and there's a couple reasons why this was so popular. And I think we're gonna, so I mean that. So it's like you had the different. So you're gonna go on a crusade. Crusading kind of is the thing. It was a thing of the time. So it's what you're gonna do. So you kind of had a couple choices at this time. It's like you could either go a crusade in the Holy Land and face certain death because traveling and fighting and stuff like that is gonna kill you. It takes years to get over there. So or you could go kill these people right down in the bottom of your country, not have to travel that far anywhere, and you only have to do 40 days of service to get these indulgences. So, and you get to keep all the loot. So, and that's another thing we'll talk about. So it's like, it was very popular. So around 10,000 Crusaders showed up at the beginning, and, and boy, it was a massacre, let's just say. So, one of the big things that comes up at this time is the massacre of Burzers? No, bourgeois or something like that. I think the place is called. We'll put up a map of what it looked like right now, so you can kind of see what we're talking about. We're still in the south of France, where France meets Spain, if you know just like in that little area, and we have 10,000 crusaders showing up, and I mean you got like the city guard and stuff like that, kind of, but they really, I mean, they don't really do anything. It's kind of, I think they hold out for 15 to 20 days, but No, they didn't even hold out that long. I apologize. That's the next place. This place, they started the siege, and then they say they had a sortie. So whenever you were sieged, they would camp out around your city, obviously, and then if to make you either surrender or capitulate or whatever. And a sortie would be like you're sending your guys out to attack certain places to kind of get like a surprise attack, like, oh, hey, surprise. But this surprise attack didn't go so well, obviously. We're at 1209 at the city of Bourgeois, and the sieges just had a sortie, and they follow the sortie back in. It doesn't work. We failed, guys. So that's it. They take the city by that, and they kill everybody. They kill everybody. It's not just the Catholic. They kill everybody. They kill the Catholics, the Cathars, everybody, and then they loot it. And what they loot, they can't. They burn the rest to the ground. So it's like, I don't know. That's where you get like the political aspect to this, and the stuff was a justified crusade. There was so at the time when this massacre happened, you had the commander of the forces, Armand Malik, I think his name is. We'll put a picture up of him right here if we have. Which, I mean, none of these people have pictures. Obviously, this is the 1200s, but they have seals and stuff and things, and maybe drawings of what they look like, so I'll put that up. But he is quoted in saying, so I don't know if it's an exact quote, obviously, but he is quoted saying, kill everybody and let God sort out the rest, because he was asked by one of his compatriots, well, how do we tell he's a Cathar and he's a Catholic when we're just slaughtering everybody? And he's like, slaughter them all, and we'll let the big man upstairs figure that one out. So it's not good. I mean, in the whole thing, I don't know. It's a whole thing. I think that it's definitely justified. Crusades can definitely be justified, especially when they're in your homeland and they're taking your people and they're raping your women. So, um, and obviously, so when I say this is very one sided, well, them doing this thing kind of creates another side, which we'll talk about here. So, but that was pretty much the massacre of Bourgeois. There were no survivors. They burned it to the ground. They killed everybody. Very good. Did you know that I was right, Boulder? Hmm? Little good boy. Okay. After the fall of Bourgeois, we have, after the massacre of Bourgeois, we have the fall of Carcassonne. Right? Carcassonne, I think that's on. But yeah, so I think it's north, a little bit north of Bourgeois is Carcassonne. And so they went there next after doing that, and it was pretty bad. The massacre at Bourgeois was pretty bad. It had people like, "Hey, come on, guys, we can't be just doing this." So when they got to Carcassonne, things were a little bit different. They didn't surrender immediately, but it was a very short siege. It started in August, and by the 15th, they were bombarding it with catapults, and they destroyed the well. So it was like the 16th or 17th they surrendered, and at this time, luckily these guys had these guys they got treated a little bit better, I guess. They didn't get completely murdered and slaughtered, but they were forced to leave naked. Literally no possessions, no clothes, no nothing. They were forced to just leave naked. All they could take was their life with them. Which is like, oh, I guess that's okay. But when you really look at this at the end of the day, it's like, wow. So and this is creating hostilities all around. I mean, a lot of these people had family members from local places, and it's like, well, you just killed my family. Well, you just took everything, because it's not like these people got their stuff back. Like, it was taken. They were kept occupied. The land was taken. Those people lived there and stuff like that. Um, Very not good. So obviously, this is going to create some tensions. So and then after Carcassonne, I think Lestor and Castle Cabaret are the next places, and they were the only places that fended off the first attack. Good for them. Good job, guys. So they fended off the first attack, but And they got lucky too, because by the time that they got to these guys, those two places had fallen, but the campaigning season was over. I guess we can kind of go into a little bit of an explanation with that. With this crusade, it was a lot different from the other ones for the reason that it was close. People didn't have to travel forever. So back then you had campaigning seasons. Obviously, we have 12 months in the year. Sometimes it's nice, sometimes it's not. So whenever it's nice weather, that's when the campaign season starts. I think in June, maybe March, and something like that. I think June's campaigning season, but it ends in December. I think December is when campaign season ends. And don't know these things for sure. I'm saying them off the top of my head, but I'm right a lot of times too. So I think it's around that time specifically. So in that time, you would have people doing. They would leave for whenever it was winter, they would just leave because I mean they only had to stay for 40 days too, so it's like they would just leave, and then and it's like the funny thing was it's like they would go out take these places, and then during the winter it would be hard. They would be like trying to keep it with a skeleton force, and luckily nobody was trying to take it back over because the Cathars didn't have a force to fight with. But yeah, so after the fall of the bourgeois and the Carcassonne, and they went to last tour and Castle Cabaret. The attack was um, repelled, and this is December 1209. We're going into 1210 with the campaigning season starting again. Gonna have to do a little bit of a fix. Carcassonne was not the one that had the well taken out and stuff. They just capitulated, and they were forced to leave naked and stuff like that. They were a fortified city. It wasn't the well thing. Um, we are going to talk about the city of Toulouse and Castle Cabaret, or Les Tours and Castle Cabaret, which is where they attack next. That's where we're going to put the map up now of there, which I think is to the north, but it might not be. But they repelled the attack. So, and them repelling that attack was in the winter of 1209. Remember, the Crusade started in 1209, so uh, we were coming into 1210 when the campaign in season. Oh, yeah. Actually, you know what? We're keeping that. I'm keeping everything else I put in. Just a correction that Carcassonne was not the one that got the well taken. So that's as we're going to Bram. We're talking about Bram. I had that. So Bram, this was the one that they had a real fortified city, and they had catapults, and they launched them at the well and broke the well, and that's when they had to. Carcassonne, they did not have to do that. Those people, they had a fortified city, but they were overflowing with refugees from the other places when people fled, so they just kind of had to capitulate. And they were forced to leave with no possessions. So that was true, was not bullshitting about that. Okay, then we're moving on to Brum. We're in 1210, new campaign in season, and it was a well fortified city. It was not overflowing with refugees, and they could not storm the castle because it was a mountainous terrain and well defended, and so they just surrounded it with and bombarded it with catapults, which is obviously what they would do, and they hit the well system of this. And what happened then is if you can't get no water and stuff, very quickly you will die if you don't drink water. Fun fact, if you don't drink water or a liquid, you will die eventually. So don't do that. Um but yeah, they so obviously they had to give in and stuff like that. And stuff, and they stole all this stuff. I mean, the sentiment was really turning towards these commanders and stuff. That hey, you can't just like come here and kill everybody and take their shit and stuff. Like, come on, man. Especially the Catholics. That's the thing that was kind of like so that happened at Carcassonne is that it was the Catholics too that had this happen to him. So it's like we're supposed to be crusading against the Cathars, right? So then why did I just make my Catholic brother and leave naked? So like by this time sentiment's really turning against the commanders and the crusaders that are okay with this. And there's hostilities from northern and southern France. Most of these crusaders coming down from up north I mean, there's always hostilities a little bit, I guess. Which I mean, I don't care. I don't care. My Southern brothers from America, I love all. I mean, America's different. Cause we're number one, baby. That's why. But at this time, you at this time you had the Northerners and the Southerners in France, and they have felt. I mean, why wouldn't you feel ways about each other? You just came down and murdered my whole family. Yeah, I'm probably gonna feel some type of way about you. So, but most of these Crusaders are from the North and stuff. So yeah, so by the time we got to Brum and stuff like that, and they capitulated, they had to surrender. It was only the Catholics this time. So the Catholics were permitted to leave and stuff. And it's like so and then at this the so we had to the Cathars were then given, a chance to be like, hey, you need to repent and stuff like that. And I guess brings us into perfect and non-perfect Cathars and the political aspect of that. So we're going to talk about that next. All right, so when it came to the Cathars, as we talked about, they don't have a standing army, they don't pledge allegiances, so they obviously don't have ranks or a formed opposition or any way to rebel against this. So it's like, well, then how was there a crusade? How was there people fighting? So obviously, at this time, there's war people fighting. Men will always fight around. So the local lords were gaining a lot of the Cathars are gaining a lot of sympathy from the local lords because of these massacres and stuff like that by like the 1215s 1216s it's kind of getting a little ridiculous and people aren't going to sit around and bow and scrape forever. Eventually they're going to do something about it, and that's what happened. So eventually so eventually some people did join up in the Cathar cause to just fight off these invaders. So it wasn't like a real and that kind of brings in two different aspects of the Cathars and who they were, because then there becomes two different types of Cathars. And we have you have the perfect Cathars and the non-perfect Cathars. And so the non-perfect Cathars are the ones doing the fighting, but they're saying they're fighting for the Cathars, but really in name only. Really, they're just fighting because that's their people. And then you have the perfect Cathars, who this is their faith. They're fighting. They're not gonna do, but they're not going out and fighting. They are fighting by not giving up their beliefs and stuff. But they are not fighting physically. So you have the perfect ones who are sticking to it. They're doing everything they will, and they're not gonna surrender. They're not gonna convert, and they're not gonna say they were wrong. The non-perfects, on the other hand, would. So whenever they can't fight, they were outnumbered or they lost. They were called non-perfect because they were. It's kind of like Cathar in name only. Kind of, we'll call them kindos because they're Cathar in name only. Really, they're just bringing us up to fight for that reason. But and all of the military ones. Maybe there were some, but no, because those two things fight. Those two things. It's actually interesting because you think about it, like those two things kind of um they can't exist together. Like you can't because the Cathars can't do military service and stuff. So how can you have a crusade against people that can't have a military? I mean, that's just a massacre. That's not a crusade. That's just a massacre. But well, so by 1215, you had all of these people. You had like Raymond there, and he drummed up support from all the dissidents of people getting killed and stuff, and they went back and they fought, and that's what we'll talk about next. Is the the Cathar is coming back. Revenge of the Raymond. So as we talked about, there is a political angle to this and a religious angle to this. Obviously, that's going on. You have the crusade against the Cathars. The Cathars are a religious sect who are being crusaded by Pope Third the Innocent, who is a Catholic. But you have um, the religious aspect of the Crusaders coming down, and why was it so popular? Because it was a crusade right in their own backyard. They only had to fight for 40 days to gain indulgences and loot and everything else that comes with crusading. They didn't have to travel to the Holy Land to then do this. They're not fighting experienced soldiers. It's like it's like if you're going on a crusade in the Holy Land, your chances of coming home are like nothing. I mean, and they had to look at it realistically because especially if you're coming from France, which is at the top of Europe, I mean, If you're watching, I mean, if you're watching this video, I imagine you know where France is. But I'll put a map up. Fuck it. Maybe you don't know where France is. Map up. So that's France. So obviously, to travel to the Holy Land, which is the Middle East, you have to go through the Mediterranean Sea. Which we'll do that. We'll show one of them, I guess. Very perilous journey, especially back then. We're not in today's world where you hop on a plane and just go anywhere. No, you are, if you're lucky to have a horse, you're right. Well, no, I don't think. Yeah, I think they had. I don't know. Yeah, they had horses and carts and stuff. I imagine. So I think yeah, they did. So they had. If you're lucky, most people had to walk though. It's like a horse was like a cart. Most people were walking or riding in a cart. Which led you open to dangers of dying or everything else. At this time, people weren't just like leaving, so you do that, get to the cart to then get to sea to then get on a boat, which is perilous. Jesus, there's a very good chance your boat's not going to make it where it's going. So, and it takes forever, and you could die just by so many things: dysentery, scurvy, a thorn that like an infection. You get a bad infection because there's no antibiotics. Somebody kills you. Somebody robs you. There's so many things that and then you get there and then you have to fight Muslims, which are people that are very ideologically, they're not going to get, they're, some very, you have to give it to the enemies where they are formidable. So, and they were definitely some formidable enemies at the time. So you could either go do all of that, or you could go crusade down south. Take that's just a couple days march, bro, and we're only doing 40 days. I can get loot out of this, and I get my indulgences. I can say I fought in the Crusades, da 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 da. Da. You can spring back off of that to do whatever. I mean, seriously. I mean, it sounds good. If you were talking to me and I was in that position, hell yeah, I would do it. Why wouldn't I? That's amazing. That's like, oh wow, I don't have to like be like, well, take care of the kids. Like, no, I'll be back here in 40 days. We're good. So there's definitely a religious aspect of it, and the political aspect of it. And then I talked about the other side, the Cathars having, there's that side of it to where it's a religious angle and the defense. It's very interesting how there are dynamics to both the political and religious side of this happening. For both sides going on, there's reasons for doing it and not doing it. And it's very interesting that, like, at the end of the day, if you look at it, it's kind of really silly, but the reasons why it happened weren't, and the dynamics that go, and the nuances that happen with that. Because, like I said, you had the Cathars, which really didn't have a force at all. They couldn't do military service and they couldn't pledge allegiances. So, but then they got sympathies because they were massacred and slaughtered and stuff like that. So they started to gain sympathies like that. But then it's like, okay, but then and it's funny, they attracted warriors and stuff, but then it's like, well, you're not even really a Cathar, but you're fighting for them. People are dying and bleeding. That is very real. Very, very real things happening. It's very, very interesting dynamics that we have going on, and I think that's why I find this so interesting, so interesting. So yeah, and if you've watched this far, we're still going. We're about to get to Revenge of the Raymonds, my favorite part. Maybe not my favorite part, but let's stick it to them. So as we were talking about the Cathar army and their side and stuff like that, they didn't really have anybody or anything until after the massacres where they started to gain sympathies and stuff like that. And as I've talked about him before, Raymond, who was a local lord of Toulouse or the area around there, I'll put up a map of the place he owned. After all this, so we're gonna flash forward ahead. So it like 1210, 1211, they just kind of massacred everything and took everything over, and it was under occupation. So like by 1215, 1216, this is kind of too much. And we got Raymond, Count of Toulouse, and his son, who who weren't Cathars, and that's the thing. It's so funny, but they took up the fight for the Cathars because they were kind of tired of the injustices and the stuff inside is a really big corruption. So they took up arms and they've raised a very they we don't have exact numbers of the forces they raised. So we're in about 1216. The Crusaders, there's like 10,000 of them, but they're spread out all over the place, defending all these different points and stuff like that. So he gets together about thousands of as they say, a significant force of thousands, and it's enough to obviously beat them at certain points. And then this time is the 12th, 13th century. Big armies are 10,000 people. That's considered a huge, gigantic army. Whereas, like during the Roman Empire and stuff like that, you would have millions of not millions. Well, they say millions, but hundreds of thousands of people and stuff like that. Well, I mean hundreds of thousands on both sides. But anyway, so they had thousands of people that they disenfranchised, people that lost everything, whatever reason these people wanted to fight, and they started taking over all of these places. Talking Carbaron, I'm talking Bourgeois, I'm talking Bram, I'm talking Minerve. I'll put them all up. So all these places that got taken over, and I don't think they took the one back because it got like razed to the ground. Maybe they took the land back over. Who knows? I wasn't there. But anyway, so they start taking these places back. And we got Raymond, and he's like Raymond the fifth, and then Raymond the seventh, Raymond the fourth, and his son Raymond the sixth. Should be like Raymond the fifth. I don't know. His son. They raised it all up because they're pissed off, and they go and they take it all back over and stuff, and they start holding it. King Philip. So there was King Philip of France, the whole entirety of France. It got to the point where he had to send in his son, who commanded a force. Uh, King Philip, Prince. I don't Henry. That's not going to be right. Probably Prince Philip too, but um, they had to send them in to finally quell it and stuff. And so it's like 1216. It says it's a 1225, but there were. It's kind of like it wasn't really more high intensity stuff, but you had Raymond. He's probably one of the more. So you have okay. So let's go over. So we have Pope Innocent the Third. He's the one that kind of started this whole thing, and he sent his papal legate Pierre de whatever, the guy that got killed that started and kicked this whole thing off, and he had commanders like Armand O'Mund or something like that. We're gonna take a second, and I can't if I don't have the names, I'm gonna put like pictures of them right now or whatever. I mean, so here's the thing when it comes to people like that and stuff, and it's like, well, PRDs, so. It's like, yeah, they're cool and stuff, but it's like, okay, it's hard to remember these people. Nobody knows who they are. But I feel it's important to take a second and try to go over who the big characters of this one are. So it's going to be Pope Innocent the Third, that Pierre guy that died because he kicked it off. Then we got Raymond. Then we got like Armando Moon, King Philip. He led the forces, and there's a couple other ones, but those are the big ones. Is Raymond and him, and those. It's funny, this whole entire crusade failed. So, I mean, after all that is kind of a stalemate then, and they did, well, it's like, so they did, negotiations and stuff. But it's like the non-perfect Cathars capitulated because they were tired of dying, and then the Pope gave them all their stuff back anyway that was stolen. So, but it's like people still died, and like the stuff that was taken with and looted, they didn't get back, but their lands and stuff were given back eventually, like the Raymond, the guy that went up against the Pope and stuff, it's so funny. He eventually gets pulled back into it, and then he goes and crusades again. And it's so funny. Another dynamic of this is that the Cathars were crusaded against, but eventually their penance for that was to go crusade. So it's like you were crusaded against, and it's like, dependent for that, you were gonna go do the same thing that was happened to you. Good luck. And it's like, and they were told to go to the Holy Land, which it's like, and be very lucky for your priests today, because back then you could be told to go on a pilgrimage, and I think they still could. I think your priest could still do that when you go to confession. Be like, well, this I got to repent. Go pilgrimage to the Middle East. And he could even probably be like do it on foot. Now, would you actually do it? Back then, you had to actually do it. So yeah, it's just a funny thing. Funny little irony of how the things happen and stuff like that. But yeah, the crusade was a failure. As we talked about, kind of recap a little bit, we had the Cathars. They were a sect from the 12th and 13th century that went up against Pope Innocent III. They got their ass kicked until Raymond, the Count of Toulouse and Tripoli, took up their fight against them, and then they fought and took that stuff back over, and then it was eventually discussed and they surrendered. But the thing is, the perfect Cathars, which we discussed with perfect and non-perfect, were the perfect Cathars did not capitulate. So the non-perfect ones were like, yeah, we'll stop fighting and stuff like that. But the ones that were like perfect ones that weren't fighting and stuff, they were like, no, we're not, we're not. So the crusade was an overall failure. And but I mean, they were eventually rubbed out through the Inquisition, and I guess that's something that I want to talk about a little bit. Obviously, I'm not going to go into a huge thing about the Inquisition. It was like, the Inquisition was a thing set up to persecute people that were heretics and stuff that were seen by the church, and they were like up in your bed. They were pretty much like secret police for the church. Would be the best way to describe them. But they did eventually stomp out the Cathars. Um, some of the stuff they would do in penance, and make them do would be wearing yellow crosses on their garbs. So they did not like the cross, and they did not celebrate churches and stuff and believe in that. So they made them wear yellow crosses. That was one of the ways. Like I said, then it's like it varied. There were so many things you could get in trouble for and have to do as part of the Inquisition and penance or whatever. And it would range wildly from like just like a little slap around wearing the thing. There was an odd one where a lot of them were made to show up once a month to the church butt naked, and you were scourged. They would call it scourging, which is it's like where they take like things and let's see if I can throw anything up about what scourging is. The definition of scourging for that time. But once a month they had to show up naked to their church to be scourged, and then like we talked about, they were sent on crusades to the Middle East specifically. So they would be sent on pilgrimage, and it's like they were sent on pilgrimage to the Middle East to fight the crusade, or to fight the enemies of the Holy Land and stuff. And that's why a lot of this came to an end. It was a very interesting crusade, and it was like one that had a lot of political motivations. And see, it's like, but if I fought in that one, at the end of it, would I be like, well, is that really the same? Did I really earn the same thing as somebody who went to the Holy Land and came back? But it's like, well, it's like then if you were on the other side of that getting massacred, then you had to go fight. And it's like, well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, either way, you have to capitulate eventually, unfortunately. And I guess that's a good thing. Like, thank God we live in today's world where we don't have to do that. So. But yeah, another thing that they would have to do after they go fight and go do that is to still like come back home if they survived, still be scourged, still show up to the church once a month to be scourged. So it's like you went and fought and like seen some shit and did some shit, but like I'll see you at 8 tomorrow, Sonny, for your scourging. And I think that's like a humiliation thing. And thank God that our church is no longer like that, the Catholic Church. Obviously, there's some things that were not so great about it, but today's Catholic Church is a million miles removed from that, and a lot of people can't seem to like separate the two. It's like really weird. I don't know. It's not weird. I understand it, I guess, but those aren't the same people, bro. It's not the same institution. So it's like okay, and they so it's like I don't know. I'm choosing to separate that. I don't think it's awesome, really cool history. I think we should all learn about it and want to learn about it. But as far as thinking that's the same exact church today, obviously not. There's denominations everywhere. You look everywhere. There's denominations, and they're not wiped off the face of the earth. We're not calling crusades against them. Your pastor isn't asking you to go on a pilgrimage to go crusade the Holy Land. Though some people might want their priest to ask them to go reconquer Constantinople. Rip Istanbul, what the fuck is that? Sorry. Constantinople, may it rest in peace. What a beautiful city with a lot of Orthodox Greek history. But yeah, so those were the Cathars. They were wiped out through the Inquisition eventually. So what the Crusade could not do, the Inquisition definitely did. Eventually they died out. Obviously, there's no Cathars around today. There's things that have, and it's interesting. Their manuscripts were rediscovered, I think, in the 70s or something like that. See if I can throw something up about that. No, if it was rediscovered, why we knew about it. But interesting sect, interesting time, interesting thing, interesting crusade. You don't hear about it. I think I've heard of I heard the Albigensian Crusade as something like it's like, oh, like a niche topic of history to talk about. But it's like that's one of the more interesting ones. You have the First Crusade, which is awesome. Everybody should know the First Crusade. That's when we went and took care of business. But and then the subsequent crusades were not so good. Not the People's Crusade, the actual First Crusade. The Second Crusade was alright, but then like the third and fourth one was so good. But then we had, the Albigensian Crusade, and there was a couple other ones. There was also one in the north of Germany where the Holy Roman Empire was. They had some enemies up north. There was a crusade against them as well, which might be the next video topic that I cover, because I also know about that one very well. I like this form a lot better, where I'm covering something I already know. Obviously, I went and did some prep, and I went and did 3 days. I mean, fuck, I wrote like a bunch of notes for this, but um, went through and did that. I feel a lot better about doing stuff like that, but who knows? Obviously, as the weather gets better, we're gonna get out with Bolt and do some videos there too. I had the exposure messed up on my last one, so if you watch that one, I appreciate it. But yeah, so I hope you have a good day, and if you watch this far, I'd like to remind you to subscribe and like. Tell me what you like about the video. Tell me what tell me about myself, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope everybody has a good day. Bye.